children had already started arranging the story in their minds. That was one of the things Elias noticed more now. They took what he gave them and tried to build shape from it before he was finished. So in their version, the story had started with Ashanti and Maya. That made sense. Two girls meeting at the same event, a conversation, a class, the beginning of a friendship. It felt like the kind of opening people expected stories to have. Elias let that idea sit for a moment before he shook his head. That was one beginning, he said. The youngest looked up from her plate. Not the beginning, not the only one. The children quieted. Io leaned forward first. You mean something else was happening at the same time? Elias nodded. The same night, he said. Same mixer, different part of the lawn. The late afternoon light rested across the deck table in warm stripes. Plates had been pushed slightly out of place. A glass of water caught the sun near Elias's hand. The yard beyond them was still and green, ordinary in the way that made the story feel stranger. You thought the first introduction was the whole story, Elias said. It wasn't. It was just one part of it. He looked from one child to the next. Other people were arriving too. The freshman mixer had the kind of energy universities always tried to call welcoming. Tables lined the lawn in careful rows. Student clubs, orientation volunteers, academic advisors, language groups, cultural associations, flyers and sign-up sheets laid out in neat stacks. Music drifted from speakers near the student union. It was loud enough in some areas, too low in others. Everywhere, students were doing the same thing in slightly different ways, trying to look comfortable before they were. Malcolm noticed that almost immediately. He moved through the crowd easily because he was tall, composed, warm-faced, and attentive in a way people trusted quickly. A volunteer handed him a campus map, and he thanked her with such easy politeness that she softened on instinct. He folded the map once and put it in his back pocket. Language fascinated Malcolm. He noticed it quickly who shifted tone, who softened, who became more formal, who relaxed into something closer to home when they forgot themselves for a second. He liked hearing where people returned when they stopped performing so hard. Two students near the orientation table were switching back and forth between English and Spanish. A girl near the beverage stand kept answering questions in flat, careful English, then turning to her friend and speaking French so quickly it felt like a release. A few steps later, Malcolm heard Arabic behind him. The comment was quiet and annoyed, something about the lemonade being too warm already. Malcolm smiled before he meant to. Then, without making a moment of it, he answered in Arabic as he passed. It would be better if they had put the ice somewhere else. The student blinked, then laughed in surprise. Her friend answered him in Arabic too, testing him now, amused. Malcolm replied easily, not showing off, just meeting them where they were for a few seconds before moving on. He did not stay long enough for the exchange to become a scene. He never needed to. What mattered to Malcolm was not proving he could speak. It was hearing how people changed when they no longer had to explain themselves first. Chadwick arrived from the east side of the lawn and noticed the setup before he noticed anyone in it. He stopped near the path and watched the event the way he watched systems he did not trust yet. Two entry points, one main sign-in table, a drink station placed too close behind it. Too many people slowing at the same first stop, then adjusting around one another. The event was not badly designed, just inefficient. To Chadwick, that was almost worse. He had the habit of breaking things into sequence without trying. Input, pause, redirection, delay, correction. Most people just moved through the lawn. Chadwick kept noticing the logic underneath it. A group entered from the left and slowed too early at the center table. Two students behind them veered right. Another pair crossed too sharply to avoid the line and cut off the path toward the academic booths. The result repeated itself again less than a minute later. Predictable. If the welcome table had been shifted 10 feet, the flow would have improved immediately. If the drink station had been farther back, students would have separated naturally instead of clustering. The system was simple enough that the flaws showed quickly. That interested him more than the event itself. He moved forward at last and let one volunteer hand him a name tag. Major? She asked. Computer science. The volunteer brightened automatically. Oh, nice. You'll probably want the innovation lab table. Maybe, Chadwick said. He wrote his name neatly, stepped away, and kept watching the lawn. He had lived in New York long enough to trust movement more than explanation. Crowds told the truth about design faster than people did. Malcolm noticed him because he wasn't watching people. He was watching the setup, the tables, the flow, the points where movement slowed and redirected. Malcolm followed his line of sight toward the center of the lawn, watched one cluster build and break around the sign-in area, and stepped beside him. They built a bottleneck, Malcolm said. Chadwick glanced at him, then back at the crowd. Yes. Malcolm nodded toward the sign-in station. Too many people hitting the same first stop. And too early, Chadwick said. It interrupts flow before people know where they're going. Malcolm smiled slightly. Computer science? Chadwick looked at him properly then. Yes, that tracks. How? You're not watching the event, Malcolm said. You're watching the routing. That got the smallest shift in Chadwick's expression. And you noticed it, he said. I notice people first, Malcolm replied. But bad structure announces itself. For a moment they both stood there watching students adapt around a problem most of them had already accepted. What's your major? Chadwick asked. Comparative linguistics. Now it was Chadwick's turn to nod once. That tracks too, Malcolm laughed softly. How? You've been listening to the crowd since you got here. Malcolm tilted his head. That obvious? To me? That answer pleased him more than he showed. The humanities advisor had been trying for several minutes to get someone to take interest in a first-year seminar. Most students accepted the flyer and kept moving. Malcolm took one because she looked tired. Chadwick took one because he had stopped close enough to be handed one. Malcolm skimmed it first. Language, memory, and power, he read. Chadwick looked over. Malcolm continued, quieter now. Cross-listed seminar. Small enrollment. Discussion-based. First years only. He turned the page slightly. Examines how institutions shape understanding through language, categorization, and narrative form. That got Chadwick's attention in a way the innovation lab table had not. The advisor noticed. It fills quickly, she said. There's also a project-based component. The first observation assignment is usually done in pairs. Malcolm glanced at Chadwick. Chadwick glanced at the flyer again. Neither spoke immediately. The advisor smiled, already seeing possibility where they were still pretending not to. You should sign up now if you're considering it. Malcolm made a small gesture. Go ahead. Why? You seem like the type who needs a complete record. That doesn't answer the question, Malcolm smiled. It answers enough of it. Chadwick signed up first. Malcolm signed up after him. Then the lawn pulled them apart again. For the rest of the evening, not dramatically, just naturally, the way first events always did. They simply left knowing the other existed. Back on the deck, one of the children frowned. So they didn't become friends right away? Elias shook his head. Not right away. They had only met. Then why does it matter? Elias looked toward the yard. Because some meetings matter before anyone understands why. The children sat with that. The class, Io said finally. That's where they got to know each other. Elias smiled once. Yes, he said. That helped. The seminar met on Thursday afternoons in a small classroom on the second floor of a humanities building. Most freshmen walked past without noticing. There were 14 students, movable chairs, tall windows, and no podium. The professor introduced herself briefly, then wrote 3 words on the board: language, memory, power. Malcolm noticed the room before he sat down. Who chose the center? Who stayed near the wall? Who wanted to be seen thinking? Who wanted to disappear? Chadwick noticed the syllabus: observation before interpretation, interpretation before argument, argument before comparative analysis. The sequence was deliberate. He respected deliberate. When the professor moved through introductions, Malcolm kept his short. Malcolm, he said, comparative linguistics. Then, after a pause that made the room listen a little more carefully, he added, I'm interested in what changes when people think they're being understood. Several students looked up at that. The professor did too. When it was Chadwick's turn, he spoke evenly. Chadwick, computer science. The room was already trying to decide what that meant in a seminar like this when he continued. I'm interested in systems people call neutral because they don't examine how they were built. That shifted the room just enough. Not dramatically, just enough. Malcolm turned slightly in his chair. Interesting. The first discussion centered on a short institutional description projected at the front of the room museum language, careful and polished, full of precision that concealed as much as it clarified. The professor asked what the text was doing. A few students answered at the surface. It's informing. It's providing context. It's describing the object. The professor let those answers sit for a moment before looking toward Chadwick. And structurally, he glanced once at the paragraph. It narrows interpretation while pretending not to, he said. A few students shifted. The professor nodded. Explain. It signals openness, Chadwick said, but the wording still directs the reader toward a preferred conclusion. The language looks neutral on the surface. The structure isn't. The professor turned to the other side of the room. Malcolm? Malcolm leaned back slightly. It also uses tone to secure trust, he said. If the institution sounds measured enough, most readers stop asking what's missing. The professor looked between them. Good, she said. Both of you are reading beyond content. Stay there. The rest of the class caught up slowly. The professor picked up the syllabus. Your first assignment is observation, she said. No argument yet. No conclusions yet. I want you to go into a public space and pay attention before you try to interpret. Before students can analyze anything well, they must learn how they are being guided. She began pacing slowly as she spoke. Ask yourselves, what is being made visible here? What is being left out? How are people being directed by language, by layout, by tone, by sequence? What kind of behavior is this space encouraging? What is being framed as normal? Who seems comfortable? Who must adjust? Nobody was writing casually anymore. Most people move through institutions without noticing how much has already been decided for them, she said. This course asks you to slow that process down. She looked around the room once more. Observe first. Then we'll talk about what your observations reveal. After class, they walked out together. Malcolm held the door. Chadwick noticed, but not in a way that required thanks. You realize, Malcolm said once they were outside, you startled half the room. I answered the question. Yes, Malcolm said, with precision. People find that aggressive when they're still being vague. Chadwick glanced at him. Do you? No, Malcolm said. I find it useful. They crossed the quad at a steady pace. Students moved around them in loose currents, heading toward dining halls, dorms, study groups, and nowhere urgent. Malcolm pulled out the syllabus. First assignment, he said. Observation exercise in a public space. No argument, no conclusions. Just record what the structure appears to guide. Chadwick nodded. Pairs, Malcolm added. They said pairs. Malcolm let the page lower slightly. Do you want to work together? Chadwick looked at him for a second. You already decided we should. I suspected we should. That is not the same thing. No, Malcolm agreed. It's just faster. That got the smallest almost smile from Chadwick. Fine, he said. Excellent. They chose the train station cafe near campus because Malcolm said public spaces were more honest when people thought no one was paying attention, and Chadwick agreed because transit environments revealed priorities quickly. Malcolm arrived first. By the time Chadwick sat down, Malcolm had already noticed the room had divided itself without anyone saying so. Students near the windows, commuters near the back wall, solo customers defending tables with bags, staff using slightly different voices depending on who approached the register. Chadwick sat, looked once toward the counter and said, The menu board is too high. Malcolm blinked. Hello to you too. It forces hesitation, Chadwick said. People step up before they're ready. That slows the line, which irritates everyone behind them. Malcolm laughed. You really are like this all the time. Yes. Good. They worked differently, which made the pairing useful. Malcolm wrote in phrases, Customer softens voice with older cashier. Commuter switches languages on the phone when annoyed. Student lowers volume when asking for more time to pay. Familiarity changes. Politeness. Chadwick drew structure. Entrance sightline failure. Cue disruption point. Seating creates false ownership. 2 exits, 1 functional path. Register placement controls pace more than staffing. After 20 minutes, a man at the next table dropped his phone and muttered something in Arabic under his breath. Malcolm bent slightly, picked it up, and handed it back. You got it before it cracked, Malcolm said in Arabic. That already counts as a win. The man looked surprised, then smiled. He answered in Arabic, warmer now. They exchanged a few quick lines. Nothing long, just enough for the tension in his face to loosen. When the man turned away, Chadwick looked at Malcolm for a moment. What? Malcolm asked. You do that casually. Speak Arabic. Move people from caution to comfort. Malcolm looked down at his notes. Language helps. It's more than language. Malcolm glanced up. And your notes aren't just diagrams. Chadwick said nothing. Malcolm tapped the paper between them. You're tracking behavior through structure. You keep calling it layout, but that's not all you're seeing. Chadwick leaned back slightly. No, he said. Malcolm nodded once, satisfied. That was enough. By the end of the afternoon, they had not exactly become friends. When Malcolm spoke, Chadwick did not need the performance translated out of it. When Chadwick observed something, Malcolm did not need it softened into a more comfortable version. That mattered. As they gathered their notes, Malcolm looked down at the pages spread between them. You realize, he said, we wrote the same assignment from two different doors. Chadwick glanced down. Malcolm had written about trust, tone, and the social effect of language. Chadwick had written about sequence, design, and the way structure narrowed behavior before most people noticed. Same room, same pattern, different entry point. That's efficient, Malcolm said. That's convergence, Chadwick replied. Malcolm smiled slowly. That right there is exactly why I wanted to work with you. Chadwick shook his head once, but there was no dismissal in it. They left the cafe side by side, not in step exactly, but close enough that the rhythm could come later. Back on the deck, the children were quieter. One of them finally asked, so were they all together by then? Elias poured more water into his glass before answering. No. The answer disappointed them more than he expected. They were not a group, he said. Not yet. Then what were they? He looked out across the yard again. Near, he said. The words settled over the table. Sometimes that's how it starts. Not with a plan, not with a name, just the same people moving near each other often enough that the pattern begins before they do. The youngest rested her chin in her hand. Did they know the others were close too? Elias smiled, but only slightly. Not yet. He stood then and gathered one of the plates from the table. But before he turned toward the door, he added one more thing. Same campus, he said. Same early weeks. Same season. He looked back at them. The story was still assembling itself,